Majora's Mask or Ocarina of Time? Which is the better Legend of Zelda game? Obviously, video games and how good they are is entirely subjective, and when you take a look at how both of these games did critically, it makes it all the more subjective. I'm a huge fan of the Legend of Zelda series. They mean a lot to me. I have Zelda tattoos, and I was born in the late 80s, which means I grew up during Zelda's venture into the 3D world. In this video, I'm going to break down both games, make some comparisons, pros and cons, and try to figure out which game is actually the better game. Now, I will preface this by saying that Majora's Mask is my favourite Zelda game, but I want to try and look at the two games objectively and see how they stack up against each other. Now, straight off the bat, the weirdness and creepiness of Majora's Mask stood out for me as a kid. I had never played or seen anything like it, and I was immediately hooked. I had, of course, played and loved Ocarina first, but Majora captivated me in an entirely different way. I think in order to fully appreciate that eeriness and that creepiness in Majora's Mask, you need to play Ocarina first so that you can get a feel for the locations, the characters, and the lore behind all of those. You can definitely still get that feeling by just playing Majora, but it feels somewhat amplified by playing the more normal, for lack of a better word, Ocarina of Time first. Ocarina is absolutely a very solid game overall, with very few major criticisms or complaints. I can absolutely see why some people are put off by some of the things that Majora throws at you, especially, the biggest turnoff has always been the additional challenge of the in-game timer, and there's the overbearing stress and panic of the unnerving moon always looking at you from overhead, creating a real sense of urgency. As I said at the start, I like Majora's Mask more. Ocarina was my first Zelda game and therefore will always be extremely special to me, but Majora just hit my emotions and feelings consistently in a way that no other Zelda game has done since, even the most recent open world adventures, which I absolutely adore. I have never been interested in games that last hundreds and hundreds of hours, and while Ocarina isn't exactly one of those, I like that Majora is a shorter game and doesn't overstay its welcome. Ocarina goes a little bit too long for my liking. I find the overall narrative is just a bit more appealing and interesting in Majora's Mask, although I think it's handled differently, and especially well in Ocarina. Ocarina makes extremely strong use of subtlety and game mechanics to reinforce its narrative, especially in regards to growing up and swapping between young and old Link. While Majora does also handle this very well, the game isn't quite long enough to make the same level of impact. Majora also excels really well in its sub-narratives. The secondary characters are so much better realised than Ocarina, with each area having a number of named characters, each with deeper lore and personality, which helps to make them feel more real than their counterparts in Ocarina. Getting down to the nitty-gritty of it, when it comes to general gameplay, I would probably still give the edge to Ocarina, with it featuring more traditional dungeons and temples, more enjoyable gameplay sequences. And that's not to say that the gameplay in Majora is bad, it's an extension of Ocarina. But as I've mentioned, it's a much shorter game and has, in my opinion, some quite tedious sections like climbing up Stone Tower or the trading sequence under the well, just to name a couple. I think overall, Ocarina is full of many more fun enemies, you could say, such as Stalfos and Iron Knuckles. Majora is somewhat lacking in this department, with only one encounter with an Iron Knuckle, and it deploys a less mechanically realised fight against Stalfos-like enemies. The margins are very fine, don't get me wrong, but I think in terms of combat and boss encounters, Ocarina has the edge. Majora doesn't exactly skimp on those kind of things, it's got some fantastic boss fights as well as one really bad boss fight, while Ocarina has more, but they rarely hit the same heights as the Majora bosses. But they also never reach the same lows, so this is a tough one. I'm going to put this down as a tie. Majora, I feel, absolutely has the better overworld, hands down. Majora's field is one of the best fields in any 3D Zelda game pre-Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. Not too large or empty, and it's visually appealing to explore, even though there isn't a huge amount going on. I find Ocarina's field a little bit tedious to traverse, but it does use the field very well to reinforce the game's narrative. Regarding the narrative, I would say that Majora wins if you want an interesting one, but Ocarina wins if you want a more balanced and fun adventure. Majora's Mask does things which are pretty unlike anything else that we've seen in games, the time loop concept being absolutely staggering at the time, And still to this day, very few games have done it as well as Majora did. It's a very Zelda thing to introduce a core feature or mechanic, which then serves as the game's hook, whether it be sailing in Wind Waker or the Ultra Hand of the recent games. But the time loop was revolutionary for its time, and it's the main thing that people remember, for better or worse. I'm not saying it's a perfect game or anything, absolutely not, but I love a game that does something new and different. It has some of the franchise's best and most fun abilities, like Goron rolling and Zora swimming especially, which are both excellently done and well utilised. The bosses, as I mentioned before, are a great challenge and unique among other 3D Zeldas. I love bosses like Adolwa, which can be beaten a number of ways. Got is a lot of fun, and Twin Mold is an awesome spectacle still. Dungeons are challenging and they ask more from the player than any other game in the series, but they're never unfair, and that's really important to me. I love difficulty, I love challenge, but it's got to be fair. It's got to be something that you can learn to overcome, and Majora does that really well. I've got to come back to swimming as the Zora, just as I said a second ago. It's one of my favourite standout moments in any Zelda game. It's one of the things that I remember about Majora's Mask before most other things. You know, the Zora are one of the most interesting and cool races in any Zelda game, so this was an especially cool moment for me. In comparison, Ocarina lets you turn into an adult, which, you know, it's still cool, but it's not a Zora, is it? Most Zelda games let you play as an adult, so this one doesn't exactly blow me away. It was cool at the time, but looking back, great, you could play as Big Link and Small Link. If what you want from a Zelda game is the archetypical, epic, sentimental, and heroic Zelda story, Ocarina of Time will probably be more for you, because, simply put, its execution of that style was perfect for the time, and it helped to mould future Zelda games. If you want something different and darker, you'll want to go with Majora's Mask. It has better items and abilities, better dungeons, better bosses, a better overworld, and a better exploration of its lore and themes. People talk about its uniqueness and it being dark and think that that's what makes it cool, and you know, it's fine to feel that way, but for me, I love the empathy of the game. Resentment and hatred are major themes in Majora's Mask, but we're meant to see those things as understandable and human and relatable feelings. Seeing the four bosses represented as children who tell you their anxieties and ask you to play with them is one of my favourite moments in the entire Zelda franchise. The sorrow and grief in the game is somewhat cathartic, not masochistic. Skull Kid doesn't just get cast away, you know, he gets accepted and forgiven, assured that he still deserves to be happy and to be loved, even after everything that he did. This game is beautiful in the way that it deals with everyday feelings that a lot of us struggle with. Both of these games are just incredible, monumental achievements made with not much power behind them, but filled with trademark Nintendo love and attention. I will always give Majora the edge as it means so much more to me, but you literally cannot go wrong with Zelda, the greatest series in video game history. So, to sum this up, I think it's going to sound like a little bit of a cop-out, but there is no better game. Both of these N64 iconic legendary Zelda games serve a different purpose. As I say with Ocarina, it's your classic hero saves princess story, whereas Majora has just got so much going on, all these dark undertones and all these deep meanings about your feelings and your anxieties and your thoughts. So Majora's Mask is always likely to hold on to that number one spot for me because I just resonated with it more back then, and I still do now. If I go back and play it occasionally, I still have those same feelings, and I'm excited to play it, where I'm not quite as excited to play Ocarina again in nearly 2025. And that's obviously not to say it's a bad game, because it's not. It's a damn near perfect game, as the critical and fan scores have deemed it to be over the years. It gets 99 on Metacritic. I believe it is still the highest rated game of all time, and Majora's Mask is only, what, like 4 points behind it? So, you know, where do you get those 4 points from? How do you go from giving something 4.5 stars to giving it 5 stars? The margins, as I said before, are so incredibly fine. They are both just incredible, magical, fantastical experiences, and they deserve all the love in the world. So whether you fanboy for Ocarina and hate Majora, or you fanboy for Majora and hate Ocarina, all that matters to me is that Zelda games out there are getting love from millions of people, as they very, very much deserve to. I can't wait to see what Nintendo do with the next Legend of Zelda game, whether they go back to the old 3D, more linear dungeons and temple-based gameplay, or if they stick with the open world, Tears of the Kingdom, traversing a huge map and traversing the skies. I don't care. Just give me more Zelda. Zelda, Zelda, Zelda. Thank you for checking out this video, guys. I hope it offered a little bit more of an insight than maybe what you've heard before, even though this conversation has been done to death by now. Let me know in the comments which Legend of Zelda game is your favourite, whether it's one of these two. It might be Twilight Princess, it might be Skyward Sword if you're a little bit weird. Just let me know in the comments, have a chat with me, and I hope to see you again on the channel very, very soon.